I sure hope this camera angle is okay. Let's find out, shall we? In theory, this camera angle is better. So, sure hope that works. Anyway, while my laptop slowly but surely boots, today we're talking about, we're doing a check-in on Agustina Bazterrica, everyone's favorite Argentinian author. She became famous recently, and by recently I mean a few years ago, back in, I want to say 2019, 2020, 2017, or sorry, 2020 is when the English translation, English translation was 2020. So 2020 when she became famous for Tender is the Flesh, you know, that book everyone read about cannibalism. Also, annotation check. We see that. We see that, all that purple. This is why we're talking about this book. So, based on all the research I've done about Agustina and her stoof, Argentinian writer, broke out in 2017-ish in Argentina, and then blew up again in America when her books were translated and republished. So I knew she existed because Tender is the Flesh, you know, the book that is about the hypothetical what would happen if we couldn't eat animals anymore. So instead of the world becoming, you know, vegan, as it should, the world instead decides to turn to cannibalism because guess what? Killing the poor is so much easier than, you know, feeding them. So that's basically the whole gist of this book. The whole gist of this book is Marcos being the head of like a human packaging facility where they kill humans and eat them, or not eat them, they kill them for butchering. You know, cut them up into a million little pieces. Everyone was traumatized by those like 4 or 5 chapters in this book. So this, interesting enough in its own. But this year, probably about a month ago at this point, I've been working on this script on and off. Augustina, again, came out with The Unworthy. This time, instead of talking about the meat packaging, which I think this is a great example of the jungle for modern times, that's what I think Tender is the Flesh is. This is a great example of, I don't want to say Dante's Inferno, because it's not even close, but it's similar in that it's calling out people for their BS and what they're doing to hurt the world and others. So, she wrote probably the scariest apocalypse I have ever read. Because her apocalypse isn't like humans being awful. That's just, you know, how it be. This is more about the wastefulness of humanity coming to bite it in the ass. So, for the most part, Tender is the Flesh, I would say, is like, is a pre-apocalypse book. The Unworthy is post-apocalypse. And I think they're the same world, personally. Now, my evidence for this is mostly duct tape and super glue, holding these two books together. But I do think they are the same world, because if you read Tender is the Flesh with a mind of keeping an eye on the climate, you're going to see this is a hot book. This book is humid, it's awful. I think it takes place in South America, I believe, and it's at least in the Spanish-speaking countries where it takes place. So without giving a proper name, it does have a lot of like, the world is humid, the world is hot, you know, like that equatorial climate going on with it. Then you get into the apocalypse of The Unworthy. The Unworthy follows our unnamed protagonist. She is, for lack of a better term, a cloistered nun at this mysterious convent that talks about like the old gods abandoned us and these new gods are protecting us from the nuclear fallout, and in reality they're only surviving because they're getting their protein from crickets, and they have a deep underwater well which has been untouched by the radiation in this like cloistered nun. And this whole book is about like how religion can violate you in various ways. So here's the thing with Augustina. The apocalypse and reading about it and studying it isn't necessarily a new thing. It's not even close. There has been millennia now we've talked about it. We have examples from the ancient Mesopotamians. Their creation tale involves the world getting destroyed in a flood. That's very similar to how the Quran has one of those tales, and so does, I believe, Exodus in the Bible also has the same kind of story where God gets so upset at humanity that they decide to destroy everything and restart with a new people in their image. So during modern times, though, floods and tornadoes and all of that aren't exactly the worst because we have, like, yes, there's the human loss and the loss of property and things that you can never have again, but we have safety nets in place that will catch us if a tornado comes through tomorrow or an earthquake happens. There will be people there to help. So we've been able to mitigate that human impact and able to prevent the life loss outside of the initial catastrophe that happens. So instead, uh, instead, Augustina is focusing on a world that rejects this humanity of, okay, there's people there to help. It rejects that and instead turns into that worst, like, what if I did that awful thing that all of us have inside of us? So we have a focus on rejecting humanity and hurting others is basically what these books are. Because, like, Tender is the Flesh, again, we're abandoning the poor, we're abandoning those who can't afford to care for themselves. There's a whole subplot where Marcos's grandfather, he puts him in a nice nursing home because if he puts him in a cheap nursing home, his body might disappear, go to the human processing facility, and he doesn't want that for his father. He wants his father to be cremated, be done and dusted, nothing like that. Um, in the Unworthy, we have, a world that is dying, if not dead, and there's like traces of life coming back. There's like little things like inside the convent, it's pretty freaking horrible, but outside the convent, based on what the Unworthy has told us, we learn that it is definitely the lesser of two evils. Yes, you're being abused physically, mentally, and emotionally inside this convent, but at least you're getting a square meal a day, right? You're not going to be starving to death on the outside to be preyed upon by other people. So, this world that Augustina has created is awful. And it's one of those authors where it's like, oh, I think we need to do a check in on this lady. Let's make sure she's okay. She, in fact, reminds me a lot of Otessa, Otessa Moshfegh. This is my favorite novel, by the way. There'll probably be a video on this in the near future. But focuses on, the ugliness of humanity, not the kindness of humanity, and how killing off everyone doesn't really help. Even in these books, there's a quote here that I wrote down. I'm constantly looking down at my laptop, by the way. There's a quote that I wrote down where, quote, the adults live in a fugue state where Marcos describes people's demeanors as waiting for the nightmare to end. So humanity isn't helping. They're hurting themselves. They're not trying to fend for themselves in this novel. So we have this awful, 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 awful world laid out in front of us. So what happens when this world is kind of reflecting our current world? So our current hypothesis as for this awful future we've laid out for ourselves as a human race, we're all going to experience climate change at some point in the near future, if not currently. So in The Unworthy, our protagonist has a world where it's very, very similar to ours. She recounts stories of like her youth, and they're not good stories, especially in the before times. The author says that like there's a scene where, or not the author, the main character, who I don't think is given a name in The Unworthy. There's part of me that's like, I need to reread this, but there's part of me that's also like, please don't do that to yourself. This book is not good for your mental health because it's too real, six me. Also, annotation check. Look at that. Not as intense as Tender is the Flesh, but pretty healthy. So as the Earth continues to warm, scientists are postulating that water levels are going to rise at an accelerated rate. at this point, we're going to start running out of potable water because most of the earth is covered in salt water, which is therefore undrinkable because it's too salty. So we're struggling through a world where humanity is fighting for the very water to survive. There's this one quote where the main character is talking to Ulysses, who is like a friend of hers from when she was little, and she says that, or she told Ulysses that there were no enemies in the water war, only people trying to survive, people dying of hunger and thirst. And in my least favorite scene of this novel, in the Metal Woods, which if you've read this novel, you know exactly what's coming up here. And I'm going to try and talk around it because I don't want to get demonetized. So she's wandering the artificial forest, and after walking for several hours, she finds herself in this mechanical woods. There were many trees, but the woods was small. It saddened me. The woods she came to understand were a crude recreation of the real forest that fell victim to the Great Blackout. So the Great Blackout is this moment that's constantly alluded to when all of the renewable or non-renewable power in the world stopped working. And for me, this is the moment when humanity finally gives up on itself and starts turning towards this evil bastardization of empathy and kindness and just forgets that for self-preservation. And that seems to be a major theme in this novel because throughout The Unworthy, the main character is watching all kinds of awful things happen to the other nuns in the cloistered convent that they're in and doesn't say anything. And in fact, the first thing that she does in this book is she admits to sewing cockroaches into, I believe it was Lord's pillow, I believe. Yeah, Lord's is pillow because she felt like it, basically. She didn't really need to do this. She just wanted to punish Lords for no real reason. So we have this idea of cruelty replacing humanity's kindness, and eventually our main character finds compassion and love and companionship. But unfortunately, she can't leave the convent, which I'm sure there's some literary reason for that, that like it makes sense that she can't leave. But my brain goes, oh, kill the gays, because that's where we are. We're in a bury your gays kind of mood. That's what I got from this book, unfortunately. But besides that last bit, where the gay people don't have their happy ending, they're really satisfied with the book. So, I guess in conclusion, Marcus and the Unworthy show us what happens to people when they're pushed into this mold by society that they don't necessarily want to be in. And I think Bazterrica challenges our preconceptions by showing us humanity. So there's this one quote that I really love from Bazterrica that she said in her press junket before The Unworthy came out. And I want to share that quote with you before I end this video. So she said, "I'm not interested in creating partisan moralistic literature. I am interested, though, in the book moving people, asking them questions, making them reflect. Maybe my book can at least generate a different perspective, an understanding, a sense of empathy with the other. In my opinion, Tender is the Flesh and the Unworthy are both novels. They're novels of all time. I want to say they're good. I really do. I mean, I've read Tender is the Flesh twice now, so if that's any indicator, anyone who knows me personally knows I don't really love rereading novels too much unless it's like, you know, my favorite or on my top 10 list. I definitely wouldn't put these novels up there yet, but I feel like with the direction that Bazterrica is heading between these two novels, that by the time her third book comes out, I'm going to be like, oh my god, 10 out of 10, loved it. And by loved it, I mean hate it. So I guess with that in mind, hit the 3 fun buttons down there, you know, like, comment, subscribe. Enjoy these 2 novels if you haven't read them yet. Fair warning, they're a lot. So especially in today's world, if you don't feel like reading that, I don't blame you. There is a loud truck passing by, so I sure hope you don't hear that. And yeah, I guess enjoy your time. Read a book. Take some life. You know, peace out.